Hey everyone, welcome to The Future is Golden. I'm Ruthie Kim, and this is a podcast where we explore what it looks like to step fully into your purpose, potential, and influence. I am so excited today. We have a very special guest on our show today, Jasmine Bellamy. Jasmine has a long resume of amazing work that she has been doing. She is the founder of 101 Ministries. She is a spiritual director. She hosts a podcast, I believe. She's the former, and I'm going to read this to get this right, the former vice president of merchandising, planning, and allocation at Reebok. And Jasmine, you were also named by Sports Illustrated as one of the top 100 influential Black women in sports. Thank you so much for being here today. You are fascinating to me. I love following your Instagram. It's inspiring, especially right at the top of the Instagram. You say you are dedicated to the theology and practice of love. We're going to get into that today. Thank you for being here on The Future is Golden.
Thank you so much for this lovely invitation and warm welcome. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Jasmine, I first got connected to you at the Women Working Calling event a few months ago, and you were the first speaker. You opened up the event, and I remember watching you on the screen. I was at an offsite location. I was watching you on the screen, and I was just so locked in. There was such a richness in what you were sharing. I remember thinking, how can I be her friend? Because I feel like now we're friends. You have so much richness to offer. And even just right before we jumped on this call, we were chatting and I was just like, let's hit record because you don't need any prompting. You have got a story to tell. And I know our listeners are going to be blessed by it. So I wonder if we could just dive in. Tell us about this dedication to the theology and practice and love and how it all started for you.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It literally started out of my own personal crisis. I had been married 22 years and found myself in a situation that it just wasn't loving. And at the time, two young kids. And I just knew that I was really not honoring what love is by staying. And I would be a really bad parent if they thought that's what was love. Mm. And so after 22 years, decided to leave. And I remember within the first days of moving into my new home, literally standing in my closet and hearing the words, "There is love you have yet to understand." And I had no idea what that meant at that time, but I can look back now. And I don't even want to say it was the first thing, because if I look back to things years and years before that, I could see the seeds of what was happening. But I think that was the most pivotal moment toward love in particular that I remember. And then I remember a few months after that really being compelled by this question about what it is to live a life of love, or living love as God sees it. And I remember saying, how is it that I've grown up in the church and I've never actually ever been asked that question before? It was, or no one had ever said that in a sermon before. And it just didn't make any sense to me that it seemed like a foreign question. Wow. And from that moment, I literally was locked in to become Love's student. And I really just went on my own journey of teaching myself everything that I could find about love. So that was from every scripture I could find about love and really sitting in what it means. Even scriptures that may not say love directly, but actually are speaking about love. Yeah. But mainly really sitting in the idea of loving God, loving self, and loving others as the new commandment, and the idea of put these words into practice. Those two scriptures right there for me really have become the framework of Love 101. And what I found was, as I had committed my own life to living a life of love, like I literally, I'm a contemplative, I'm a mystic. I do all the spiritual practices, all the things, right? I'm a yogi, I'm a meditator, right? So I kind of go in and with some serious intentionality around things. I literally just got back from walking the Camino, so I'm a pilgrim, like, you know,
Yeah.
so I can be intense, but but what I committed to this daily practice every day, every action, every word, every thought, really looking at through this lens of love. And as I started to do that, I like consistently, I was writing about it, whether it was Bible studies or, sermons or whatever. I was all in. But as I sat and did this self-examination, I was putting love into practice in my own life. My own life was transforming. And then I got to see how the context around me changed, how my home changed, how my relationship with my kids changed, how my relationship with my neighbors changed. Everything started to change as I was changing and committing my life to love. And, so in 2019, at the end of 2019, just felt really, I had just started, I literally kind of researched for a year and then launched on social media a year later, because I was in a love conference, and I could hear this invitation, like, you are sitting in a love conference and you're not saying anything about it. And I just felt so compelled that there was so much that I was learning that was transforming my own life, that was very practical in our day to day, that I was really compelled to invite others to be a part of that, to ponder the things I was pondering, to try out the things I was trying. I'm a practical theologian by nature, so it's about the experimentation and the trying, and to see, if I am forgiving, how does that change the dynamic of a relationship? If I'm accepting, how does that change the dynamic of a relationship? If I'm not trying to drive to my own conclusion and I'm open and vulnerable, how does that drive and impact the nature of the relationship? So I was constantly trying these things.
Yeah.
And what I really learned about the journey is that love is a sanctification process. It is about us becoming more like love. And so that's what I've committed my life to. And so, connect with the things that you shared in the introduction. I'm a business leader. I've been in the marketplace for 31 years. I've been a manager of people for decades. I've always been a good manager of people. But when I showed up to work as a love practitioner, my leadership style changed, because now I was leading as the loving leader.
Yeah.
And I got to see how my influence in an organization completely changed. And I became not just a business transformer, but a culture transformer. I got to see how my team lit up, because I came to work as my full self, and they came to work as their full selves. And they felt welcome, they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt valued, and they felt safe. They weren't concerned about fear. And so it changed how they showed up to work. I was concerned about them as humans. And so all of that changed. And so what has happened, fast forward, is I went to seminary. I got a Master of Arts in Theology from Fuller Seminary. Almost every single paper I wrote from every discipline was about love. And so I've legitimately been a student of love. And then as I became the loving leader at work and saw the impact at work, I was named to the Sports Illustrated list because I led Reebok through culture transformation, as they had committed to becoming united against racism. And I was asked to lead change management. And so I created this platform called Courageous Conversations. And it literally transformed the culture of the organization. And it was all about proximity and storytelling and narrative and allowing us to be open to be changed by another story. And so as I did all of that, I had to sit back and say, like, love did that. So what could happen if Reebok is a microcosm of the marketplace? What would happen if we had more loving leaders?
Yeah.
And so that was really my question, that has now led me to becoming a doctoral student at Fuller. And my program is the Doctorate of Global Leadership, and my cohort is the Redemptive Imagination of the Marketplace. And so my redemptive imagination is love.
Jasmine, everyone who's tuning into this podcast right now is thinking to themselves, I know exactly why Ruthie invited Jasmine to be on this show. Because once again, the richness of your story at so many different levels is so incredibly inspiring. I'm imagining that there are many women listening to you, many who are in the marketplace thinking, that sounds great, Jasmine. Like love and transforming. But how do we even get started? Like for, just if we were to just make it super practical for women who are like, I'd love to do that. Where do I start? What are the steps? What would you say to them?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, the Loving Leader framework that I created was literally because of that question. Because I was going, I'm a keynote speaker, and I'm, speaking at events, and I'm talking about how love can transform your work culture. And people are looking like their heads are tilting. Like, I don't even understand what you mean. I don't what word do you use? I'm like, love. They're like, I don't get it. Like it was like, does not compute. Right. And so, which honestly very much fuels my research. But what I really did was I sat back and distilled what was it that I brought into the conversation at Reebok that changed me as a leader. And I used, to make it easy, right? To make it easy. And it's, it's not about being me at work. It's literally about meeting you where you are and becoming a loving leader yourself from who you are. But I create a loving leader framework. And so each letter of the word loving has a word that helps us to kind of walk through if I'm maybe being loving or not, So the L stands, the first L, because I actually have two, but my L is for listening deeply. Paul Tillich says the first duty of love is to listen. And so that listening is really step one in the process, which my second L I also have added recently is learner. And I added that because I was reminded of something I wrote, a piece I wrote not too long ago. Actually, it was in 2019 that I wrote after reflecting on the course of love by Alan de Botton. And he talks about love becoming more like the Greek definition of the word. And he talks about the love being between two people. When it becomes much more about learning, then it becomes less about the friction and the defensiveness, right? So there's a way I can offer that someone will receive, and then there's also me receiving. And so that learning becomes a really important part of love. And so I thought it was really important lately to add that L back in. So the L of listening and learning.
Jasmine, I wonder if I could just ask about that real quick, because as a coach, I'm doing a lot of listening, a lot of curiosity as well. And I notice that piece alone, the listening, the being curious about the other, can feel like a huge growth edge for people. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, why is that so hard for us as humans? Like, why is it so hard for us to listen and be curious about the other?
Yeah, because we're so used to just waiting for a break to say the thing that we want to say. So we're actually not listening. We just really want to say what we want to say. Often also we're just driving to our own conclusion, right? We're coming from our worldview, our perspective, our ways of knowing. And we think that that's like finite and everything. And what happens when you actually listen, you can start to learn from another person, and you get to see that the world is, much, or the way people think or lived experiences, all these things become more vast and open up to you because you've actually listened to someone. We're constantly seeing life through our lens. That's what it is to be human in these bodies. But there are so many other lenses. And so there's this invitation to be able to listen to another story. I mean, at the end of the day, what I saw at Reebok as we were doing that courageous conversation work is the transformation that took place when other people's lives collided in their storytelling sharing. Because there's just life that you just don't know. And when you learn, you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Empathy comes from that. Yes. All of these things can be the fruit of you actually listening to someone and not coming from the perspective that I have the answer to everything. And so listening is a posture of humility in a really serious way. But it also becomes this invitation for us to actually be engaged in conversation with other people.
So good. Would you continue on sharing a little more about the framework?
Sure. So the O is like the big one for me, and that's open. And it's the posture of being open.
Wow.
And if you think about it in life, so often our posture is very closed.
Right.
And so this idea of open, it's open to listen, open to learn, open-hearted, right? Because oftentimes our hearts are so closed up, but can we open? Can we be open to be changed by somebody else's story? Can we be open to the fact that maybe we don't have the answer? Are we open to be able to curiosity, right? All of these things, it's the openness. And if you think about the opposite being resistance, like not resistance in an intentional way of not giving up, but the resisting and like, I don't want that. The openness is a huge piece of being a loving leader. And if there's anything that I think I'm constantly coaching my own self through is, am I being open? So, the letters themselves help you with your own kind of self-check, or your own regulation. Am I being open? Am I resisting something right now? And is that part of the problem that's happening here? So a posture of openness is critical to love.
It makes me think, as I'm an Enneagram 8, Jasmine, and so I observe in myself, I can find myself in conversations or situations with an immediate closed off resistance, right? And so that, I love that you said this is the big one, because there's something powerful about shifting our posture, right? Just observing it, noticing it. And that's the work I've been engaging in too, is like, I'm noticing something here. I wonder how I could shift into that openness. What would you say to people that maybe relate to my tendency, who are like, I find myself very closed? Is there a tip or a hack to get into that open posture?
Such a good question. I mean, a lot of my questions often like, how's that working out for you? Right? Like literally, like if it's not working out, then perhaps we'll try something else.
Yeah.
But what you demonstrated is the beautiful part, is that I can look at myself. I can do have this inner conversation with ourselves. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the I, to be able to notice what is going on with me.
Yes.
What is going on with me? And it's interesting. I think if there were another pushback that I get around love often, is people want to abandon the work of loving themselves. There's a lot of reasons, culturally why we've gotten to this place, but this idea of knowing yourself well Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, 100 people talk about it being the privilege of a lifetime,
Yeah.
becoming yourself. And if we're closed off from doing that work to see how we are, then it becomes very hard to actually operate in this posture of love. Because a lot of times we are resistant. If you think about the perfectionism that pervades our culture, if you can't admit that you're not perfect, that's gonna be real hard.
Yeah.
But for me, I think one of the beauties of this journey is the grace that I extend, not just to others, but to myself. The honoring that I do of my humanity, who I know who I am and the gift that I am, and the fact that the person in front of me also is, so the openness, it takes some practice to get to that place. We have or many of us, I should say, have a very vicious inner critic.
Yeah.
Who is very unkind.
Yeah, I relate to that.
Who let's say it differently. An inner critic who is unloving.
Yeah.
Most of us do. And so we're used to that track kind of running in the background. But when we can disrupt that with a more compassionate thought, a more honoring thought, it starts to kind of, melt or dissolve, the walls that might be around our heart.
Wow. So good. All right. Tell us about the V.
Yeah. So the V, it's so funny. The V is another one that I could go on with all the options that are available, but the one I lean into most is vulnerable. And that's a hard one too.
Yeah.
I never said the work of love is easy. Let me just emphasize that.
Yeah.
I've never said that. It's probably not probably. It is the hardest work I've ever done. But it's also the most transformative, and it is also the joy that I literally have in my life. Someone literally, I was talking to them today, and they talked about the light that they see in me. This all comes because of this work of love. I didn't just show up this way. It required me doing the work. So vulnerable is a big one. And so that becomes that counter narrative to the perfectionism, that becomes a counter narrative to the unloving voice that's in our head, that I can actually say, I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
I am not, I say it oftentimes, I am not for everyone.
I relate.
And,
I relate to that.
Right, I'm not for everyone. And I can also identify when I'm hurting and when I've had pain, and I don't run from those things. And so vulnerability also speaks to my lack of trying to control the outcome of things, right? So even if you think about it in a work situation, particularly having been a senior leadership team member, I don't come into my team and force an agenda on them. We're having open conversation. We're talking about business. I am learning from them as much as they are learning from me. I might have one thought, but they have another. And I am vulnerable, and that I allow myself to shift and change based on the things that people are saying to me.
Wow.
That I'm not rigid, that I'm not trying to control things, that I can be changed, that I can be, more pliable in situations. And so that vulnerability is big, it's big because, there's one of my favorite quotes, is anything dead coming back to life hurts.
Wow.
And that's vulnerable.
That is.
You're going to feel that. And I will say personally, I was walking through life, prior to me leaving my marriage, numb. Like I wasn't feeling. We could be walking around like automatons.
Yeah.
And so that vulnerability to be able to allow myself to be open to whatever may be, is a surrendering act. It's a
And that
surrendering act.
it occurs to me, Jasmine, as quite different to maybe what some people would consider stereotypical leadership, right? Like
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
there's this sense of like, if I'm a leader, I got to know the answers. I've got
Uh-huh.
to set the agenda. You're
Mm-hmm.
inviting us into a very different space.
Mm-hmm. And so what I will say, that what you just brought up is actually the major part of my doctoral research. That
Mm,
what I'm actually starting with is, there's a culture, there's a norm, there's a value system of capitalism
mm,
that has always been at its root unloving. Period,
wow.
full stop.
Yeah.
Like that. And so what ends up happening is we walk into work and we start operating in the system, and that
Yes.
system is unloving. And then because of the way we've institutionalized it, we think to be successful, we have to operate the way that system operates. But that, in for people of faith in particular, like, and I'm not just saying Christian faith, but many of us, right, who are rooted in love, that means we have left love at the door when we
Wow.
walk into work, and we start operating in a different kind of system.
Mm,
So part of what my research is really looking at the history of domination, of of dehumanization, of fear. That's the undertone of what created the marketplace. And so we might try to put these happy faces on it now, and use these other words to say we're going to be, create psychological safety and well-being. But if you've not gone back and dealt with the roots of how this operation works, then it's just platitudes. And
wow.
so for me as a loving leader, what and all the kinds of research and studies that I've looked at that talk about the mental health of employees, being so impacted by the manager, their people manager. I have a mentor who talks about attachment theory in the context of loving leadership. And what he emphasizes, that the attachment figure of a parent when we're growing up shifts to the manager at work.
Wow.
That's a huge amount of influence. And so if we are operating in a system that is not valuing us as humans, we're doing a whole lot of harm. And so that's really what I am really sitting and looking at and saying, what is this history? Willie James Jennings, Dr. Willie James Jennings, he talks about it in the view of the academy, and I'm essentially extending his thought process into the marketplace. But this idea that there has been a distorted formation of the marketplace, and that is the pool we're all swimming in. And so me offering love as this cultural, a countercultural narrative, is that it is literally about saying we've never had love in the marketplace. The fact that we sit here and scratch our heads and say, what do you mean love in the workplace? We've not had an understanding of what love is for the context of the workplace, because we've taken our familiar understanding of love, we've taken our romantic understanding of love, and we don't think that belongs here. So it's almost given us permission to then not be loving.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
But love is so much beyond our families and our romantic partners. Like, it's so much more greater than that. It is literally seeing the value and having an unselfish concern for another human. It literally starts with seeing the imago Dei, the image of God in another person. Like, that's the fundamentals of love.
Wow. I'm listening to you and I just feel like what you're carrying is contagious. I feel like it's sticking to me, and I'm like inspired and I'm excited, and I'm sure people listening in too. I think what the conversation here is so disruptive in a beautiful way, right? Like we're heading into the marketplace, we're in our workplaces with our colleagues. And this idea of being, you call it a loving leader, I think, right?
Yes,
A loving leader is an entirely new way of showing up to that space and disrupting how things have been. And that's exciting, right? That's exciting because we don't have to do business as usual. There's not a status quo that we need to uphold. There is a different way of being. Jasmine, I know that we're probably coming up on time, but would you be able to run us through quickly the rest of the letters? Because I don't want to miss any.
No. So you said all the things. So I'm going to just pick up from where you just left off. I is inner work. And we kind of touched that, right? That we have got to do our own inner work so that we can handle people with care.
Yes.
It's really what it boils down to, right? Like if you don't treat your own self well, if you can't deal with your own vulnerability, if you can't even listen to the inner voice of your own self, how do you expect that you're going to be able to do that for other people? And so the loving leader framework, inner work becomes a really important part of it. The other I'll also just shout out to David Brooks. I also love the idea of being an illuminator. What it looks like to light other people up. I think that's another really significant part of the loving leader. The N is one of my favorites. You know, you've already said the word disruption. I call myself a joyful disruptor. And so, you know, part of that is about naming the reality. And so that is the N, that this is not about gaslighting. This is what it is. And being able to sit in it. And, you know, because if we act like things aren't what they are, then we can never actually solve the problem. You know, one of my favorite translations of Jeremiah 6:14 is, you cannot heal a wound by saying it's not there.
Wow.
And so naming the reality is, you know, I remember I had a conversation once, and the person was essentially trying to convince me to believe that something that wasn't good was good. And they just kept going and kept going. And I just stopped and looked at them. I said, can we just say this sucks?
That's right. Yeah.
Can we just say that this sucks? And let's figure out how to move on now, right? Like we don't need to gaslight and make it okay. It's not okay. This sucks. And we're still going to move forward, you know? So naming the reality becomes really important, because if you can't be honest about what is actually happening, if we can't speak the truth in love, then we're not actually behaving in love. So naming the reality becomes important. And that might look like, I caused you harm. I can own that. And how do we repair, right? Like it's if we try to sugarcoat things and act like it's not happening, then it's called self-delusion. So naming the reality becomes important. And G is about the gift. Showing up as a gift and receiving the gift of others. And so this is me reflecting on what changed the game for me, showing up to work as a loving leader, that I believe is really an invitation, just an introductory invitation. You know, you just like, where do I start? That if you could just run through those letters, right, for yourself, to say, how am I doing in any of these? That moment of self-reflection, and maybe tweak something when you think maybe I'm not seeing the gift in the person, or maybe I'm not being open, I'm closed, or am I really listening? Right? Literally just kind of go through those 6. I think it's a great place to start figuring out what a loving leader is for you.
Jasmine, you are a gift. You have been a gift in this conversation. There is so much there. I feel like I'm going to go back and re-listen to this and take notes. And I want to invite our listeners to do the same. Jasmine, where do people connect with you? Because I imagine people are going to listen like I did and think, good grief, I need this woman in my life. And, I imagine there is leaders that are like, I need that framework. How do we find you? How do they connect with you?
So there's a couple of ways. I think because your audience are marketplace leaders, LinkedIn is always a great place to start. I am Love 101 Ministries on on Instagram and Facebook. I would also go to the Love 101 Ministries.com website. Because one of the things that I am offering for people, I'm also a certified spiritual director. And so what I've been doing is really bringing my marketplace expertise and my spiritual direction training into holding space for people. And so I can work with people one-on-one. I've been calling it like a workplace companion, as a place to help people cultivate loving leadership in themselves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. This
Thank
was so
you.
rich, so beautiful. Thank you for your work that you're
Thank
doing. The
you.
world needs this, and
Thank
so
you.
I'm excited as you finish your doctoral studies and all that's next for you.
Thank you.
The world needs Jasmine Bellamy. So thank you
Oh,
so much for your time. This has been
thank you.
incredible. Have a
Thank
great day,
you for
Jasmine.
sharing your platform with me. It's such a gift. And I'm so glad that we've had this time together.
Thank you.
Thank you.